Parashas Vayeitzei, Yaakov Avinu is leaving Eretz Yisrael, and he is going to Haran. And Yaakov Avinu is leaving for two reasons. Reason number one is that Esav is going to kill him, so he has to run away for his own safety. And reason number two is he is not supposed to take a wife from the Canaanite women, and therefore, just as Eliezer went on behalf of Yitzchak to find a wife, because Yitzchak himself couldn't go to Haran, so Yaakov goes to find a wife. So it turns out there are two different reasons why he's leaving. One is he has to get out of where he is, and the other is he has to go to a certain destination, meaning sometimes when you leave a place, the main reason is the leaving, and sometimes the main reason is where you're going. And that's merumas. That's merumas in the actual words. Vayeitzei Yaakov mi Beersheva. Yaakov leaves Beersheva. Vayelech Harana, and he goes to Haran, meaning there's a reason for leaving, and there's a reason for where he's going. The reason for leaving is Esav wants to kill him, and the reason for coming is to find a wife. That's right. Sometimes, you're leaving just to escape, and you don't care where you go, and sometimes you don't really care about leaving. You like where you are, but you need to go to another place. Yaakov has both motivations. But according to Chazal, even though if you read the narrative of the Chumash, Yaakov had a dream, and Yaakov had saw the ladder, and then he comes to Haran. There actually was a 14-year break from the time that he left his father's house till he had this dream. 14 years that are not recorded in the Chumash, where before Yaakov left Eretz Yisrael, he went to a yeshiva. He went to learn. And he went to a yeshiva. What yeshivas were there? The yeshiva of Shem and Eiver. Shem is not alive anymore, but Shem is Noach's son. In fact, Shem is actually Abraham's great-great-great-great-grandfather. And Eiver is Shem's great-grandson. So Eber is alive. Shem happens not to be alive. And Yaakov spends 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem and Eiver. And Chazal actually say for those 14 years he didn't sleep. I'm assuming we don't have to take that quite literally. You really can't go without sleep for 14 years, but it means, whatever, little naps, just like the Vilna Gaon. Right? The Vilna Gaon, for many years, only slept 2 hours in a 24-hour period. And it was divided into 4 periods of 30 minutes. So he never slept more than 30 minutes. In fact, they tell an interesting ma'aseh with the Vilna Gaon that he very rarely left Vilna. I mean, the Vilna Gaon, sat and he learned all day. But one time he went to a chasna in a certain place, a close family, and in this village, he was staying in a room that was like second story. That was his hotel room or whatever it was, and some enterprising entrepreneur got a ladder so people could stare at the Vilna Gaon while he was sleeping. They could look through the window, and he actually charged them for it. And they could look through the window to see the Vilna Gaon sleeping for half an hour. So the story is recorded that one time he slept for 31 minutes, 1 minute over. And he didn't know he was being watched, but he started crying and sobbing. He said, I missed a minute of learning. Ay, 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 this town is a sleepy town. It causes sleep. Ay, 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 I can't come here again. So for the next 25 years, he never came back to that town. But then he had some occasion to come back to that town. And when he went for his nap, he only slept 29 minutes. Oh, he made up. And he was so happy. He says, Baruch Hashem, Hashem gave me back my minutes. And the people who were watching, there were people who were eavesdropping then too. They Baruch Hashem, they were so happy. They felt that finally we took something away and we gave it back. So when we say Yaakov Avinu didn't sleep for 14 years, it probably means something like the Vilna Gaon situation. Those 14 years are very significant because it's very interesting. How, if you factor out the 14 years, just look at the Chumash text itself, how many years was Yaakov separated from his parents? 20, well actually he never saw his mother again, but separated from his father Yitzchak? 22 years. Why? Because when he came to Haran, he worked 7 years thinking he would get Rachel, and instead there was a switch, and he got Leah. Then he worked another 7 years to get Rachel. Although, let me point out a point that sometimes people don't know. I'm sure it was covered. Yaakov didn't have to wait 7 years. And he got Rachel on credit, meaning to say he married Rachel 1 week after he married Leah, meaning he worked 7 years. He thought he was going to marry Rachel. Instead, Lavan switches him, so he winds up with Leah. So, for 7 days, they rejoice and have, not Sheva brachas per se, but 7 days of rejoicing. After those 7 days, he married Rachel on the condition that he work another 7 years. So I think it's a little different than people think. People think that Yaakov did not marry Rachel till after 14 years. In reality, that's not emes. Yaakov married Rachel 7 years and 1 week after he came to Laban's house, but he did have to work another 7 years. So that's 14 years. And during those second 7 years, that's when the tribes were born, except for Binyamin that was born in Eretz Israel. All the tribes were born in that second 7 years. And then Yaakov worked another 6 years to kind of build up his economic prospects. So that's 776. That's a total of 20 years. And then finally Hashem said it is time to come back to Eretz Israel. And it is brought down that until Yaakov came back to Yitzchak, there was another 2 years of both traveling and being in parts of Eretz Israel where he did not come to Yitzchak. So Yaakov Avinu was separated from his father Yitzchak for 22 years. Right? That's what the Chumash tells us, 22 years. So Chazal have a famous teaching about this. And they say Yosef was sold by the brothers when Yosef was 17 years old. And Yaakov did not see Yosef until Yosef was 39 years old. That the Chumash itself tells us. So it turns out that Yosef was separated from Yaakov 22 years. So the teaching is, because of the 22 years that Yaakov did not honor Yitzchak, his father, Yosef was separated from Yaakov, that Yosef did not honor his father for those 22 years. Now, that's a famous chazal, that the reason why Yosef was separated from his father for 22 years was a getter of an onesh, because Yaakov was not Makayim Kibbud Aviyim for those 22 years. Now, the obvious question, even in Pashat Pshat, is, well, what do you mean here? What do you mean Yaakov is getting punished because he did not fulfill Kibbud Aviyim? Who told Yaakov to leave Eretz Yisrael? It was his mother and his father too. So Yaakov did not do anything wrong in what he did. At most, one could say, after he left Lavan's house, it took him too long to get back to Yitzchak, so that would be 2 years. That would not be 22 years. So one of the pshatim simply is that Chazal don't mean that Yaakov is being punished for this. There was no sin that Yaakov committed, but rather, Kibbud Aviyim is something that gives you merit and it gives you protection. Meaning, it's not that if I don't do Kibbud Aviyim, God is going to punish me, although that might be true as well. But I don't have a special zechus that could help me, that could protect me. And Yaakov Lamaisa didn't have that zechus. It's not his fault. He's not accountable. But he didn't have the Lamaisa dikas, the practical zechus of honoring his parents, honoring his father, and therefore he was vulnerable to many types of tzaras. But what's interesting is this. In reality, if we factor in the fact that before Yaakov even had this dream, he took a detour of 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem and Eiver. So Yaakov was not away from his father for 22 years. Yaakov was away from his father for 36 years. So why isn't Yaakov held accountable for those years? So Rashi brings, again, it's a long, long Rashi. It goes through a lot of chronological cheshbonos. It's the end of Parashas Toldos. Rashi says, from here we derive that the learning of Torah is more important even than honoring parents, and therefore, for the 14 years that Yaakov was osek b'Torah, that is not counted against him in terms of an onish. So he was gone 36 years, but he's only held accountable for 22. The 14 years are the years of Talmud Torah, and this is called Gadol Talmud Torah, Yoser mi Kibud Aviyim. Talmud Torah is greater than Kibud of Aviyim. This has actually, I don't want to get in too many difficult issues that maybe need to be discussed privately, but this is an issue that people often face, right? My parents don't want me to learn in yeshiva. My parents demand that I come home. So I can make an easy statement, but then I have to qualify it with a much more difficult statement. If somebody were to ask me, according to halacha, must I listen to my parents because they want me to leave yeshiva? The answer is absolutely not. You are not obligated to listen to your parents, meaning Kibud Aviyim does not obligate you to listen to your parents because the mitzvah of Torah overrides Kibud Aviyim. But, and this is a very important series of buts here, and that is, even if halachically you are permitted to stay in yeshiva, whether you should do so is a much more difficult question that has to be balanced with many, many, many factors. I think the problem is that sometimes people just assume that once we conclude there's no mitzvah of Kibud Aviyim, that's the end of the discussion, and therefore I'm going to stay. Well, no, you have to look at the long-term consequences. Number one, what will your economic support be? Number two, what will your relationship with your parents be? And how much you'll need that relationship to continue to grow as a Jew, etc. So all I'm saying is, if you ask me, is Kibud Aviyim going to be a veto on your yeshiva plans? No, it's not a veto. But you got to take account of what your parents say because there's a family dynamic that shouldn't be ignored. The same thing is true for shidduchim. If I want to marry somebody, and my parent and everyone wants their parents' blessing, right? And my parents don't approve. So it depends how you ask the shaila. If you ask me, am I chayav to listen to my parents on shidduchim? The answer is no, you're not chayav. You are halachically allowed to ignore your parents' wishes. That's very clear halacha. But does that mean you should ignore your parents' wishes? Does that mean I shouldn't take into account their concerns? It certainly doesn't mean that. Okay, so you be sure you understand the difference here. It's not a Kibud Aviyim thing, but there's family dynamics, and your parents may have a point as well. Mark Twain famously said that when he was 17, he thought, I'm paraphrasing, he thought his parents were idiots. But when he got to be 21, he was so amazed how smart they got in only 4 years. And that actually has, maybe 21 is a little young, but I can tell you at 30 or 35, you will sometimes appreciate the wisdom of your parents more than you did as a teenager or whatever it is. So be sure you understand the two dimensions here. Talmud Torah overrides Kibud Aviyim, and Shidduchim overrides Kibud Aviyim, but that doesn't mean you don't take into account what your parents are saying. But now let me raise another question. So Yaakov took off 14 years to learn in the yeshiva of Shem and Eiver. Now, how old was Yaakov when he left his father? Yaakov was not a youngster. Yaakov was 63. Yaakov and Esav, they were twins. Yaakov is 63 years old. Again, Rashi gives us a very detailed cheshbon. So Yaakov took off 14 years, 63 to 77, to learn in yeshiva. You're never too old, right? But here's the thing. What did Yaakov do for the first 63 years of his life? He was living in the home of Yitzchak. And until he was 15, Avram was still alive. And what was Yaakov doing? The Torah tells us what Yaakov was doing. Esav was a hunter. Yaakov Ishtam, Yaakov was a perfect person. Yoshev Ohalim, who dwelt in the tents. Well, that's understood. A person who studied Torah. Of course, we'll have to discuss what do we mean by Torah. That's a good question too. But putting that question to the side for a moment. So Yaakov spent 63 years of his life Yoshev Ohalim. So why does he need to go to a yeshiva of Shem Eiver for 14 years if for 63 years he was learning Torah in the home of
Abraham for the first 15 years, and then Yitzchak and Avram and Sarah, then Yitzchak and Rivka. What purpose was this extra education be for him? So let's go back a little bit. And we talk about this yeshiva of Shem and Eiver. We don't know how many students there were. We really don't have. We know very little about the yeshiva of Shem and Eiver. But what was the curriculum in the yeshiva of Shem and Eiver? Did they learn Gemara? I mean, there really wasn't Gemara yet. There wasn't even Chumash yet. They learned Chumash. Like, what did they learn? Interesting question. The short answer has to be, well, there are two answers. I would suggest there were two things in the curriculum. One was that this was not for Jews in particular, this was for people, and they learned the 7 mitzvos b'nei Noach that all human beings are supposed to keep. Now, you might say, 7 mitzvos b'nei Noach, we can cover that in 5 minutes. I mean, 7 commandments of Noach, it does take 14 years. What is it about? So the answer is, first of all, that's actually not quite true. The 7 Noachite laws, which are binding on humanity, maybe there are 7 laws that you can state, but they have halachos too, right? For example, don't steal. So that requires honesty in business and not lying. I mean, one could spend, years and years and years going over, just as we would go over in Gemara. What's called theft, what's called deception, what's called dishonesty. So number one, the halachic curriculum would be the 7 commandments of Noach. But even then, there would be many, many discussions as to the laws of those things. The 7 mitzvahs in Noach have many, 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 many laws that would have to be studied. But I would suggest as well that the second component of the curriculum was what you might call godliness, how to connect to God. In fact, if I had to put a modern label on it, it might have been something like Kabbalah, meditation, prophecy, communing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how to develop a relationship with Hashem. In other words, interestingly enough, it may have been a more spiritually richer curriculum than we might have in a modern yeshiva, which gets us into a whole interesting discussion. Maybe you've experienced this little bit of a dilemma. A person wants to come to yeshiva because I want to find God. I want to know what my purpose is in the world. I want to understand reality. So you come to yeshiva, and we open up, and you sit down ready for your first class in the morning. And it's something about 2 people holding a talus, and each person is claiming it's mine, or if an egg is laid on the Shabbos, are you allowed to eat that egg, etc. And hopefully it's interesting, hopefully it's engrossing. I mean, some people, unfortunately, it takes them a while for that, but it's interesting, different arguments, different positions. Okay, and if you kind of have a legal mind or an analytical mind, you'll usually like it. But I think it may lurk in people a certain sense of malaise or confusion as to how is this bringing me closer to God? It's not addressing the big issues. Now, Baruch Hashem, Ohr Somayach is actually better than a lot of other places, not because we have other classes, Rabbi Godly, but whatever it would be. But in a mainstream yeshiva, you're not even going to have that. Here we have that. But even here, it's part of the day. Most of the day is 2 people holding on to the talus or whatever it is. And this is it's a confusing question a little bit. Because why do we spend so much time on what you might call the technicalities of halachic argumentation? In fact, it's not even halacha, meaning even in terms of the 2 guys holding on to the talus, you don't really know what the bottom line is, even on that. So we're looking at this position, this argument, etc. So in the yeshiva of Shem Eiver, there weren't as many halachos as we have today, so they did focus more directly on spirituality. The question is, what about us? Like, what do we do? So here, there is a concept, and it's developed at great, great length by Rav Chaim Volozhiner, Rav Chaim of Volozhin, the Vilna Gaon's great Talmud, in his Sefer Nefesh HaChaim, which is a book of it's almost a mission statement of the yeshiva world, because in Shar Dalet in particular, the 4th chapter, he talks about what is Torah learning about? Why do we learn Torah? What does Torah do for us? And in more than 30 chapters, he goes through everything. And the basic idea is an idea that at first glance, when you first come to yeshiva, it may not even make sense to you, because it's fundamentally a mystical idea. But in the course of time, the hope and the prayer is it will make sense to you, because hopefully you will experience what he's talking about. And he says that Hashem is an undivided entity, meaning unlike a human being. There's me, I have my hands, I have my fingers, I have my arms, I have my head, I have my brain. In other words, every human being can be subdivided into different capacities. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is an undivided unity, meaning to say, God does not have parts. God is only one, an undivided unity. So therefore, the will of God is the same as the essence of God. Unlike me, where I could say there's me and there's my will, my desires, with Hashem, the will of Hashem is the same as the essence of Hashem. Meaning, when I connect to God's will, I am connecting to God's essence. The Torah is a concretization of God's will, because this is how he wills us to live. And by Torah, I include the written Torah, the oral Torah, all of those things. So when I learn Torah, I'm connecting to God no matter what I learn in Torah. Meaning, I'm not only connecting to God when I learn about godliness and purity and spirituality. I'm connecting to God when I learn about two people carrying a talus. In other words, what you might call, on some level, the non-spiritual aspects of Torah, because you're connecting to God's will. And when you connect to God's will, you're connecting to God's mitzias. So what is the difference, Rav Chaim said? If you're connecting to God via this port or that port, like a computer that has 1 million ports of connection, you're connecting to Hashem. And what you're doing is, it's like literally like charging a battery. You are connected to the ultimate power source, which infuses your neshama with holiness. It infuses your neshama with closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, this is a mystical idea, because from a rational, intellectual standpoint, a person would say, okay, I get it. If I study about spirituality and I study about holiness, okay, that's a holy idea. But when I study technicalities, what does that have to do with anything? But mystically, if the will of God is the same as the essence of God, you're connecting to God. If you're connecting to God, you are being infused with holiness. So, as I say, to explain this to somebody who comes to yeshiva for the first day is not going to be so easy. It's almost, we have to kind of say, take it on faith. The hope is, and I hope that to a greater or lesser degree, all of you experience this, at least sometimes, we don't always have it all the time, that when you're engrossed in even the most technical sugya, there's a certain spiritual elevation that you can experience that hopefully has a carryover into the rest of your life as well. But, going back to Shem Eiver, in the yeshiva of Shem Eiver, it was more openly spiritual, meaning there wasn't a lot of Talmudic discussion to go over, so it was a school of spirituality, meditation, what we would call Kabbalah. I mean, obviously they weren't learning the Ari's Kabbalah. There was no Ari yet, but the teachings of how God interacts with the universe. But now we're still back to the fundamental question, why did Yaakov need 14 years in that yeshiva before he could go to Haran and get a wife? I mean, after all, Yaakov spent 63 years of his life engrossed in the study of Torah, which meant the same thing. The Torah that he learned was the same type of Torah. Again, it wasn't Gemara, it wasn't those things. So there's a beautiful, powerful thought from, I remember it from Rav Putner. Someone told me that they think it's Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, so I'm not 1,000% sure of the source. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky for sure says it, and I believe Rav Putner says it as well, that the yeshiva of Avram and Yitzchak is unparalleled. The Avos HaKadoshim are phenomenally great. But there's one thing that you could only get from Shem Eiver that you couldn't get from Yitzchak. And that is the following. It's true that Avram came from nothing, meaning Avram came from a place of Avodah Zarah, and Avram discovered Hashem on his own. All of that is true. But eventually, Avram created a tremendous following. Avram was Makarev people. Avram taught all of the Canaanites in Eretz Yisrael about God. There are some midrashim that actually say he converted, not to Judaism, but he converted to belief in Hashem, 70% of the people of Canaan, although we don't have that number in the Torah itself. And by the time Yitzchak was born, Avram was no longer an isolated person. Avram had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people who were serving Hashem based on Avram's teaching. It was a community. It was like, I wouldn't describe it as one big yeshiva, it wasn't a yeshiva per se, but a community of monotheists, a community of people who believed in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when Yaakov was born into the family of the Avos, Yaakov was born into a community of believers. Yaakov was surrounded by thousands of ma'aminim in Hashem. And although Esav was rebellious, but Yaakov grew up in a community of many, many, many people who were living by the ideals of Avram and Yitzchak through the influence of Avram. But now, Yaakov is going to face a new challenge. For 63 years, Yaakov grew up in a community of ruchnius, of Torah, whatever that precisely meant, a seviva. But now he's going to a place, Haran, of the Avodah Zarah, idolatry, immorality. He's going as a single person, right? He'll get a wife there, but even when he has children, they're going to be babies then. And even with all of his family, so he'll have 11 boys, whatever it is. He's surrounded by thousands of people who don't believe in God, who are pagans, who are liars, who engage in fraud and immorality. And Yaakov is very afraid. Yeah, Baruch Hashem, I served God when I was surrounded by thousands of disciples of Avram who were walking in that same path. But what will give me the strength to serve God when I go into an environment that's bereft of spirituality and doesn't even have the zechus of being in Eretz Yisrael, which itself is a special zechus? Yaakov is frightened. Yaakov is afraid he's going to be destroyed. So, this is the yeshiva of Shem Eiver. The yeshiva of Yitzchak is the Torah of Eretz Yisrael when you're surrounded by holiness. Shem and Eber is the Torah that Yaakov needs to be prepared for the diaspora when he's not going to be surrounded by good influences. Why is Shem Eiver so suited to this? Well, let's look at the founder. The founder of the yeshiva of Shem Eiver is Shem, although Shem is not alive at this point. Shem grew up at a time before the flood, where the whole world was evil and corrupt. The whole world was going to be destroyed because of their sins. That actually means nobody was worth saving. It's quite amazing. The only one, Noach and his family. Can you imagine, to go back to a few Parashas ago, the inner strength of Noach? Can you imagine the idea that the whole world, not just your block, people in Eretz are sometimes concerned, on my block there's one guy that doesn't keep Shabbos. Oy vey, I can't live there, the influences will be too bad. You're living in a world. There's not a single other person. But Noach taught his children that no matter what the environment is, we got to be strong. We have to have faith. We have to do the right thing. And Shem eventually founded a yeshiva that was premised on conveying those truths. What's the secret of being able to persevere when the whole environment around you is no good? And Yaakov needed those 14 years, a long time, before he could go into that environment. He didn't get that from the environment of Yitzchak, because by the time Yitzchak was teaching him, he had hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people who were faithful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this is what the uniqueness of the yeshiva of Shem Eiver. How to persevere when your environment is not an environment of holiness, but very much the opposite. This is something actually that's very, very relevant to the situation of many of you. You know, Baruch Hashem, you're in a yeshiva, great yeshiva, you're in Yerushalayim, an environment of holiness, of Torah learning. You have the wonderful opportunity that I hope you all take advantage of having so many hours in the day to be able to learn Torah. And that, as we just talked about from the Nefesh HaChaim, that fills your neshama with godliness. But at some point, unless you plan to stay here forever, which isn't, not a bad idea. I'm not discouraging that either. But, most people are not going to stay forever. They're going to go back to different environments. The environments might be the challenges of college, or even the challenges of the working place, or difficulties, tensions with family. Many, many different forms that this can take. And it's going to be tough to hold on to things. You hold on to things when you're here because yeshiva tries to make it relatively easy, so to speak. I mean, it's hard work. It's hard work to learn. Of course, it's hard work to learn. But, in terms of an environment, it's an environment that makes it much easier to stay connected. Right? I mean, it's almost, I shouldn't say that, it's almost hard to be Machal Shabbos here. I mean, you can do it. People have found ways, unfortunately. But, it's like hard. Let's say in Yerushalayim, it would be hard to find tray food here. You could find it. But it's not so easy. Right? Almost by default, at least it'll at least be Rabbanut kosher, everything will have some type of kashrus. So, Baruch Hashem, that's a bracha, because that kind of takes away some of the choices you could make that wouldn't be so good. But the big challenge is, what's going to happen when I re-enter that other world and that other environment? Am I going to lose everything that I worked hard to try to achieve? And remember that even Yaakov Avinu himself, Yaakov Avinu, the great, great tzaddik, was worried that he felt confident in his ability to serve Hashem when he had many, many people that were Ovdei Hashem. But he was afraid when he would be entering an environment where he wouldn't have all of the Ovdei Hashem. So the practical lesson is that when you go back into the environment, in a way, you're better off than Yaakov, because Yaakov was going to a place where there were no good influences. Baruch Hashem, for almost everybody, even if you're going into a largely non-religious environment, there usually will be good influences. Yeshivos, shuls, rabbanim. In other words, in a way, your dilemma is not as bad as Yaakov's dilemma. Yaakov was going to a place where there was nobody. Baruch Hashem, most of the time, you'll be going to a place where there's somebody. And your achrayus, your responsibility, is to seek out the somebodies that can allow you to hold on. And of course, in the electronic age, that could even be by Zoom and email. Even long distance, you can have ksharim. But again, it's also better to have somebody on site, so to speak, a local person that you can connect to. And I'm just using this Yaakov thought to show you that even Yaakov Avinu himself was concerned and worried about this. The Gemara in Chagiga says a remarkable teaching The Gemara in Chagiga says that divrei Torah are as difficult to acquire as gold and silver vessels. And it is as easy to lose as glass vessels. Now, gold and silver cost a lot of money. I mean, if you want to buy a gold or a silver thing, it costs a lot of money. So to acquire Torah, there's work and there's effort. Now, glass may be relatively cheap, but the problem with glass is very fragile. Right? If I drop a gold vase, it's going to be okay. I drop a glass vase, it's going to be smashed into smithereens. So the Torah says, so the Gemara in Chagiga says, Torah is compared to gold, and it's compared to glass. Compared to gold, very hard to acquire. Compared to glass, very easy to lose. And one would be amazed, in a very disheartening sense, one would be amazed at how quickly, if you're not in the right environment and you don't make the right connections, how quickly one could lose all of the progress they made in yeshiva. Things that might have taken you 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, a year, you can lose in 2 weeks. Amazing. So, I'm not sure if anyone is planning on this. This is more of a general message to keep in mind, that it's very, very important that when you're not in yeshiva anymore, you still maintain strong connections to people that will help you in your spiritual journey. And I'm referring, by the way, not only to rabbis and teachers, I'm also referring to friends. Even the friends that you hang around with, they can be even more powerful influences than rabbis and teachers. We learn from our friends, right? To try to find friends that kind of want to go on the same journey, want to take the same trip, share the same values together. And then each of you can give chizuk to each other in your times of challenge, in your times of difficulty, because you're there for each other. Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of all people, said in Kohelet, it's a very famous verse, 2 are better than 1, for if one falls, who will pick him up? But if you have 2 people and 1 person falls, Ha'echad yakim es chaveiro, one will pick up the other. Now, Shlomo HaMelech is not only talking about ice, although that's true too. If you slip on the ice, it's hard to get up, right? It's very hard to get up when you slip on the ice because you don't have a footing if there's no nothing to hold on to, right? But if someone else is there, they can pick you up. He's not only talking about ice, but he's talking about life. In life, we have moments of challenge. We have moments of weakness. We have moments of insecurity, both religiously and even matters that are not directly connected to religion. But if you have a friend, then in your moments of weakness, they can give you strength. And in their moments of weakness, you can be there for them. By the way, that's one of the meanings. It says in Pirkei Avos, you should buy a friend. Knei l'chachar means you should acquire a friend. That often refers to buy a friend. What does it mean to buy a friend? Buy a friend? I mean, like I say, hey, be my friend and I'll give you $10. I mean, what does it mean to buy a friend? So the answer is, friendship has a cost. This is very interesting. The cost of having a friend is being a friend. It's very interesting. Sometimes people say, I want somebody that whenever I have a problem, I can talk to them about it and they'll listen and they'll advise me. I want that. But then the guy has a problem he wants to talk about with you. He says, oh, sorry, I don't have time. So you want someone to be your friend, then you have to be their friend. And then you have to be willing to give them the same thing that you want from them. And that's the meaning of buy a friend, acquire a friend. The purchase price of friendship is the willingness to help that person when they're in need. And that's Shlomo HaMelech's beautiful mashal. Ha'echad yakim es chaveiro. When one falls, there's someone to pick you up. And that's a wonderful thing in life. And b'ezras Hashem, you should find it in your friends, and God willing, you should find it in your future spouse. as well. Yeah.
Can you repeat the by a friend part again?
Yeah. Well, Pirkei Avos says "Kinei lecha chaver," which means.
You said it perfectly. I just wanted to.
Well, I can't tell you my exact words, but my point is that the purchase price of friendship is that if you want a friend, you have to be a friend. You have to be willing to give to your friend all of the things that you want your friend to give to you. You want somebody to listen to you. You want somebody to be open to you. You want someone to be sympathetic to you and give you advice. That's a wonderful thing. But that's going to cost you. And what it costs you is you have to be there for them, and you have to be willing to listen to them as well. And only then, that's what it means, buy a friend. You buy a friend by being the friend that's giving to that person. That's the idea there.
Not a currency relationship.
And that's the currency, right? That is the currency of friendship. And by the way, that's the currency of marriage, too, because again, husband and wife are called beloved friends. The Sheva Brachos calls the relationship of man and woman re'im, ahuvim, which means beloved friends. And that same reciprocity has to exist in a marriage. Okay, be well and have a good Shabbos.